Thank you for coming. Commerce Oil Refining Corporation was in the news from 1955 until 1988. That's 25 years, which is typical for any big issue in Jamestown. At least 25. So they were established on February 25th, 1955, for purposes of building and operating 40,000 barrel per day refinery at a cost of $71 million. Crude oil would be supplied from the Far East, and liquid products would be sold to suppliers. Donald Loomis was the president, and Harold Geller was the vice president. Many sources are in the records of the Jamestown Historical Society. There are over 400 records about Commerce Oil. 1,700 of those were given by Ken Froberg, Sidney Wright, and Frickie Vaughan. The book, Dismissed with Prejudice, is out of print, but the Historical Society has scanned it and is available on its website. We also use newspapers, town records, Mary McGann's papers at the URI, and manuscript histories by Mary Miner and Ann Bailey. The original location for the refinery was at the tip of Portsmouth. On May of 1955, Portsmouth Town Council granted the Commerce Oil Refinery a permit for the proposed $30 million oil refinery, where the Portsmouth Priory was the only organization to respond within 10 days of their not proposing the refinery. The refinery would adjust their property at Arnold's Point. On December 5th, Commerce Oil was granted another 90-day extension. In April of 1956, there was an indication that the refinery wanted to move to Jamestown. 3 days after this article, on April 24th, it was reported that the oil company was seriously considering switching to Jamestown. Officials of the company stated that Jamestown site had all the necessary facilities, including deep water. A decision was made to hold a straw vote in Jamestown on Saturday, June 2nd, to see how Jamestown registered voters felt about a refinery. What ensued was probably the most contentious question that ever came before the people of Jamestown. From now on, the slides will show the actual newspaper, what the newspaper said. Two organizations were quickly formed. One was for and one was against the refinery. The pro group was headed by Daniel J. Murray, who is also served as the town solicitor when the Democrats were the majority of the town council. Nobody said anything about a conflict of interest. They thought a refinery would reduce taxes, increase property values, create local employment, and help local businesses. To get out the vote, they planned to organize babysitters and transportation. And they also had telephone volunteers to call people to tell them to vote. The foes met on June 1st, the day before the vote. The Jamestown Protective Association was headed by Dr. William Minor, who had recently retired to Jamestown. They argued that there would be air and water pollution, flare, and reduced property values. Also, on June 1st, a letter was sent to the voters from the Protective Association and added to their concerns the use of the water supply, workforce, housing, policing, and other services. I spoke with Harry Wright, who was the son of Sidney Wright, who was very active in the organization, and he was the one who sent out this letter. He expressed concern about oil spills. So the June 2nd vote appeared in the newspaper on Monday, on the 4th. So 777 voted for and 233 voted against the refinery proposal. In 1949, there was another straw vote for whether Jamestown should have a hoof and mouth disease laboratory. 728 voted for it, and 183 voted against it. Jamestown was in a very bad economic state after the war. And I've heard people say that, who were natives, that they had to rely only on what income they had in the summer when the summer visitors were here. So essentially there were two classes, the natives and the summer people. So all of these other proposals came to the front as ways that the town might have a better economy. The planning board was flooded during this period with proposals to subdivide large tracts of land, including the golf course. And families were really desperate for jobs. So perhaps looking at the town's population will also help to put the economy at that time in perspective. There is a famous quote about understanding a history of a place through its transportation. In Jamestown, it was about the ferries, the Jamestown Bridge, and the Newport Bridge. Jamestown was really isolated until the steam ferry was introduced in 1873, which led Jamestown from the agricultural past to a resort era. In 1940, the Jamestown Bridge was built on the West Passage. It was a toll bridge until 1969. And the toll was considerable to keep people from not wanting to use the bridge. The Jamestown Bridge Commission came up with a plan, and they printed fishing maps. And when you went over the bridge, you got a map because they were trying to track the fishermen. 8 property owners filed suit in Superior Court against Commerce Oil to prevent a pier at the end of Eldred Avenue. The judge rejected the injunction. In the middle is a cartoon by Paul Loring, and Paul did have an E at the end of his name. There were 2 passionate factions. Anne Bailey, who wrote an essay in 1980, said the refinery issue was to become the most hotly debated question the island has ever known. Divisions occurred within families, between friends and neighbors, and in business relationships. A local grocery was boycotted. The Protective Association members reported finding tacks in their driveways. She also said, to a great extent, one could determine an individual's stand on the issue by where they sat on the ferry. So here's the Jamestown Protective Association, and it lists the members. And you're probably familiar with Dr. Miner, John Potter, Sidney Wright, although, who else? Terence McGann, whose wife wrote Dismissed with Pleasure, and Prescott Froberg. So these are the some of the organizations who said that they were against the refinery. Other than the Protective Association, the only one on Jamestown was the Connecticut Yacht Club. A new body was formed and called the Narragansett Bay Homeowners Association, and they absorbed some of the other anti-refinery groups. This is the cover of one of their pamphlets. Dr. Miner was also involved with this group. The pro-group, called the Citizens Progressive League of Jamestown, advertised in the newspapers, and they were trying to rally the cry for the pro-group. And these are two of their ads. In February 12, 1957, it was reported that 17 opponents of the refinery were served a $2 million suit by Commerce Oil. The suit was against 9 members of the Jamestown Protective Association and 8 members of the George Wright family of East Shore Road. Daniel Murray filed the suit. It was for $2 million for each of the 17 members who were opponents. They were charged with unlawful conspiracy in restraint of trade and commerce. Defendants were represented by Constance Moore, who originally established that the case would take 6 months and $10,000, but it took 6 years and $200,000. Now we're going to follow the lawsuits. This shows the brief and argument for the defendants. So who were the defendants? There are 8 members of the Wright family. George and Florence were the parents. There are 3 sons, and the wives of the 3 sons were the defendants. In 1921, Florence Wright bought 30 acres of farmland in the Carr Lane area. There are still descendants today who live on that property, and all of the above people were buried at Cedar Cemetery. Here are the other defendants. You mentioned Dr. Miner, a retired physician and co-founder of Save the Bay. I want to mention Prescott Froberg, who retired from the Providence as a firefighter and was a self-employed carpenter in Jamestown. He I'm surprised that he was on the board, but his property was very nearby. But he was a strong member, and he donated. His son donated these 3 books over here, which are from the 14-day trial. That in there, each one is thousands of pages. So if anyone has volume 1 to 3, we are desperate for it. We have not been able to find it. Sidney Wright was the one person on the board who was not sued. He lived from 1896 to 1970. A meeting room in the library is named for him. He is not related to the other Wrights. And we have spent a lot of time trying to find out why he was left off the list of the defendants, but he was. Rosemary came up with a theory that maybe there were so many Wrights, they just left him off. But that's as good as any. So the judge finds against Commerce Oil. First, on March 11th, 1958, the oil refinery asked its attorney, Edward Day, that the conspiracy charges be dropped. On January 5th, 1959, following 41 days of, I said 14, it's 41 days of testimony, Judge Day dismissed the case with prejudice and delivered a ruling affirming the JPA's claim that the refinery would constitute a nuisance and reduce property values. Dismissed with prejudice, I had to find what it meant. It meant the defenders could claim damages and their counterclaim suit of anticipatory nuisance could be heard in federal court. Now we're up to June 1960, and the U.S. Court of Appeals unanimously reversed Judge Day's decision, saying that a nuisance can't be a nuisance if it does not exist yet. On June 17th, Commerce Oil announced that they were no longer interested in building their refinery in Jamestown, citing federal government cutback in crude oil. JPA pressed the appeal to the Supreme Court. Since the U.S. Court of Appeals had made a decision unanimously, the Supreme Court could not hear the case. On December of that year, the 17 Jamestowners charged that Commerce Oil suit maliciously inspired and brought ridicule, contempt, and scorn upon them. So that's their countersuit. Now back to what the oil refinery was up to. Obviously, the Providence Journal thought that a refinery would be good for Jamestown. Also, Governor Roberts and Thomas A. Monahan, executive director of Rhode Island Development Group, thought the same way. Now Commerce Oil was trying to buy land, and they ended up buying 725 acres in Jamestown for $502,500. They also bought 77 acres with water availability in North Kingstown. So what's shown here are just the first entries in the land evidence book in the town hall of who bought the land. It does not tell you how much they spent. So this is the Samuel Carr house. Elizabeth Howry owned the Samuel Carr house just north of Jamestown Shores. It had 2 sections. The part on the left was built in 1685, and the part on the right was built in 1865. It was on the Jamestown house tour 3 times before she sold it to Commerce Oil, along with 36 acres. It was the first property sold to Commerce Oil. It became the oil company's office, but had a fire of unknown origin which destroyed it in 1958. Now for a detour. The Howry sisters, Elizabeth and Mary, spent the summer in Jamestown and the winter in D.C., where their father was a federal judge. In 2012, McCarthy, the mailman, gave me, for the JHS, a scrapbook kept by one of the sisters, and they were obviously major socialites. In it, there was found an invitation from 4 different presidents. But ironically, Elizabeth was a preservation specialist for historic buildings in D.C. So why did she sell this building? Anyway, the scrapbook was sent to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History because that's where they were born. So the Carr homestead sold some land, and the seller representing Carr homestead was Walter Leon Watson. Anne Bailey has announced she found that Walter Leon Watson, who is the author of a 1940 book on the history of Jamestown, was forced to resign from the Jamestown Historical Society. We don't have that in our records. So that was a surprise. Then it became a little difficult what Commerce Oil was doing. For example, Francis Sullivan bought property and then passed it on to another organization. Also, Geller did the same thing. Geller sold land right to Commerce Oil. And he was representing Eldred Realty. So Commerce Oil was interested in being on the good side of Jamestowners. And 2 of the things that they did was they put a plaque for Eldred 1-gun battery, which was given by given to the DAR at the foot of Eldred Avenue. Commerce Oil eventually sold that property, so the property became private, and we don't know what happened to that plaque. They also sponsored a Red Sox team in a Little League, and Anthony Quentin was the assistant manager, and his son was on the team. Here we show where they wanted to have a pier at the end of Eldred Avenue. The town council approved the pier in April. The Wright family of East Shore Road sued Commerce Oil, claiming that the dock permit was invalid. They lost on appeal. Another suit was filed by Lucius Collins and others in 1959. It also lost. The Navy and Army waffled. The town gave Commerce Oil the right of way from Eldred Avenue to the bay. But there were those who wouldn't sell. And this map in the gray area shows those who wouldn't. These are only the ones from above Carr Lane. There were others who wouldn't sell, such as Ernest Vieira. An obituary in 1997 for Emily Weinreich Turpin reads in part, her refusal to sell the property she loved to Commerce Oil, her refusal to sell the property she loved to Commerce Oil helped stay a potentially disastrous chapter in Jamestown's history. Commerce Oil was plodding along, and between these years, they got a license, they hired a contractor, and they registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And the refinery was to open in June. The plan was publicized, in this case in the Oil and Gas Journal in 1957. A friend of mine told me that, he's 96, he told me that in the 50s, he worked as in the investment department, and the proposal for Commerce Oil came across his desk. And he said it was considered optimistically because there was no refinery north of New Jersey. So here are the site plans in one description. The sporting complex was to have a field house, a pool, a baseball diamond, and a tennis and badminton courts. Here's a blown-up version and a close-up of the actual working area. So by the end of 1960, there were signs that the refinery would not happen. The Gulf Oil Corporation had agreed to furnish Commerce Oil with crude oil from the Far East and to purchase all of its products. But during the long legal fight, the refinery, the oil picture changed and restrictions were placed on foreign imports. Also, Lehman Brothers withdrew its finances. So now, Commerce Oil was going to be in the litigation business, it was announced. Plus, they had over 700 acres to get rid of. And unfortunately, by 1964, the Protective Association's case against Commerce Oil was dismissed due to statute of limitations. And now the town was against the refinery, and it took away its vote of approving for a permit. Geller, the vice president of Commerce Oil, sent a letter to the town council written on stationery with no letterhead, and a date line that was inked in, saying, "We contend the license is irrevocable and that your attempt to revoke it has no legal effect." So now Commerce Oil starts selling its land. There were 14 acres in 2 adjoining parcels of waterfront property on East Shore Road, which sold for $170,000 in March. And then in April, another 39-acre tract at Eldred Avenue and East Shore Road was being sold for $450,000. This was one site that the town was considering for a sewage treatment plant. Ronald Doedman president of Bayview Realty, was now involved in sales for Commerce Oil of over 700 acres. Jobin said the property had been up for sale for a long time as an entire package, but only in the last few months has it been offered as individual parcels. Two out-of-state firms were expected to buy land. One was for development, and one was for industrial use. I'm having trouble reading. It's too dark. So next, the oil company was going to give land for the sewage plant, but it was considered a ploy, and it never happened. So next, we're up to 1975, and Commerce Oil contacted the town council to invalidate zoning and make the money that would probably help the land. One of the properties that Commerce Oil wanted to build up was a hotel, a business, and 400-slip marina. Other than Sidney Wright's comment, there was never any talk of water concerns. They also wanted to build 150 luxury condominiums and 100 rental units. Then Commerce Oil abandoned the motel marina. The town hall was cool to housing, especially condos. But Commerce was granted a zoning change, and lots were available for luxury homes. The zoning change was from commercial limited to R40 zone for 3 lots on the east side of East Shore Road, which allowed for lots for luxury homes on 40 acres. Loomis said, for once we are on the side of the angels. We wasted $30,000 in making a study which came up negative. The planning board was concerned about traffic. So here's East Passage Estates. There was a model home there, and now they could develop the site. Then there was an idea to have condos at the north end, and a zoning change was asked. Commerce Oil prodded the council regarding 3 different phases. There was a meeting at the town hall, and 200 people showed up at a public hearing about Commerce Oil's request for the zoning change. They were against the condos. So the town council was unanimously rejected a request for the zone change. So Commerce Oil could build 240 units on 200 acres. Commerce Oil had permission to build 52 single-family homes at West Reach and to build Section 2 of East Passage. So we are at the end. This is an invitation for East Passage Estates. So the end of the saga the foes of the refinery lost every court case. But because they kept pushing against the proposal, times had changed and Commerce Oil didn't want to build a refinery. So that's it. Are there any questions? Okay. If you want, you can go on the historical website and just put in under keyword Commerce Oil in parentheses, and there are over 400 items you can look at.
You have a few questions.
Yeah.
It was just that
I can't hear you.
my sister Carol was on the planning board at that time when they were making the decision about East Passage, right, Carol? And you went down to Connecticut, you flew down to Connecticut to look at a development down there, and I don't know what else she can add to that, but she was on the planning board at that time when East Passage was being established. Carol.
I don't know.
Carol Anderson, my sister Carol.
Yes. I don't know. Do you know Rosemary?
I have no knowledge of that, but yes, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not there would be condos at the north end, and it was decided that this was not a good idea. Carol, I believe you were part of that?
Yes,
Is that a good idea?
They wanted 300 condominiums where West Reach is. And of course, there wouldn't be any concern about water or overpopulation of schools. But that got defeated. I thought it was the planning board, but I guess it was council. And then they decided to do the house lots. And we were instrumental in getting the East Passage estate established. I think that came before the West Reach. And they,
Yes, East Passage.
but we did go down to Southport, Connecticut. I think we flew down. They flew us down to look at the condominium development down there to see how wonderful it was. We beat the Jamestown. But we had a very good board, excellent board, and there were a lot of very good people that had a lot of good questions to ask all the hot shots that came into New York. And they,
How much of the question of water was brought up at that time?
oh, lots. Yeah.
Because I know that this was one of the areas of non-concern when the original Commerce Oil setup was supposed to be done. And it's pretty obvious even from their drawings that water would be necessary for the refinery to work. And so I don't know why water was not more of a concern at that time. Just perhaps because no one had followed the line through, or we didn't have the issue that came up of whether we had a single aquifer. All of these things are later developments. Any other questions?
I just wanted to mention that we're just now beginning to find out the impact on electricity and water that AI will have to a region. So it's amazing what doesn't get told to sell something and what will be the final outcome.
And even the question of, there will be no pollution and nothing to the natural environment.
And no effect on the schools.
And no effect on the schools, yes.
And they,
One of the things that they had said when they were talking about West Reach and East Passage Estates was that, or the condos up there, was that all of the people who bought them would be elderly and therefore would not have any children going to school. So that this would be not affect the schools at all.
and the one at East Passage, I think they decided that you need 1.1 child in those four areas. That would affect schools.
Right. So all of these questions that you see now weren't necessarily brought to the fore at the time.
Just like one other thing I was going to say. I think it was in 1957 that we had the tanker collision right in the bay, and That, I mean, we went out, my father took us out in the boat and we watched it. It burned for days.
Yes.
And there was never any mention about any traffic on Narragansett Bay.
There was very little. That was one of the areas that the Navy didn't take a stand on that perhaps they should have. That, or even the piping for the gas, the oil coming in from the ships to the end of Eldred Avenue was not terribly brought up either in terms of bay pollution. But you'll notice Dr. Miner was not just involved in protecting Jamestown, but he was also one of the founders of Save the Bay. So there was an interaction that came across there, or an interface, if you will.
Why did Portsmouth withdraw their interest?
I think that the Portsmouth Pottery had more force than, and brought more force against the Portsmouth Town Council than, well, obviously Jamestown residents were in general for it because of the economic situation in Jamestown at the time, and the people that were voting were the people that didn't have jobs. I mean, there was a very important reason for Jamestown being for it, because the natives the men were coming back from the war, they didn't have jobs, there was a very slow economic times for Jamestown. And in fact, if you looked at the population even just before that, it had gone down again, and it was very, it was a very tenuous time for Jamestown.
What was a war deed? I noticed when you were showing that spreadsheet of deeds and war deeds, and I didn't know what a war deed was.
No, warranty. It's a kind of a deed. It's a total deed, in fact, rather than a I don't know what else other kind of deed there is, but there's other deeds that are not a quitclaim deed, right? It means that I'm transferring the property.
Mueller, who was the attorney for the opponents of the refinery, also worked with the Portsmouth group. And I don't think he charged anything.
One of the things is that Dan Murray was the legal, was in charge of the law part of it for the town and for Commerce Oil. I mean, he was a lawyer for both of them. So speaking of conflict of interest, it's something that was not brought up at the time either. Well, it was brought up by the JPA, but I mean, it was not considered to be a major issue. Although I would say that I don't believe that Mr. Murray's was ever very happy on Jamestown after things went the other direction. I don't know how many of you knew Dan, but he had a hard time.
His house at the volunteer board.
Right.
Yes, Jamestown Historical Society volunteer party was in housing. Are there any other? Yes.
Rosemary, when we did the house tour, one of the houses had a big map. Someone was gonna make a big camp, remember? And they, outside of the house, and they were gonna develop some big camp.
Up in the north end?
Was that before or after Commerce?
The camp at the north end was actually
Seaside camp.
Seaside camp, but it was a women Christian, what is that?
YWCA.
Okay. Yeah, but it was before. It was actually in the 40s and into the early 50s.
Okay.
And it was an active camp. Okay. Yes?
Where is that camp located?
Were you at the house tour?
I wasn't.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering where on the island.
It was at the far north end, just just, let's see now, if you go up East Shore, if you go up North Road and you go across the East Shore Road, it was just in that area. Is it where Summit comes in?
Oh, interesting. So when you look on the plat map and you see all the paper roads up there, that was actually for the YMCA?
Well, that was
Commerce
actually the
Oil?
development of Cononicut Park. The part of Cononicut Park was used by the YMCA for the women's camp, the Seaside Camp. And it was on the east side near, I'm blanking names of streets at the moment.
Park Dock.
Yeah, Park Dock was where the ship came in, and they were right near Park Dock. And that's, there was a pier there that boats from steamboats would bring it started off as for young women who were working and needed a 2-week vacation, if you will.
Oh, so when I first moved here, somebody had told me that that whole area was the development for Commerce Oil for the workers to live. It would be its own little town toward them. And that was incorrect.
No, that town was much earlier. It actually started in 1874.
And that was the first development in Jamestown.
Yes, essentially, yes.
Is that where the Gothic style houses are?
Where the what?
With the Gothic style?
Yeah, the Victorian, the small Victorian houses that are up there were part of the Cononicut Park development.
If you go on the Jamestown Historical website, go to the archives and look for Connecticut Park, and you'll get the whole story. There were going to be 2,000 tiny little lots with Gothic cottages, much like on Martha's Vineyard, and only a dozen or two got built. But that was the original
But
plan.
there's some very pretty ones still there.
Yeah.
So are those the little cottages that are on
There are
farm property?
several little cottages. Most of them are on the side streets. Many of them, of course, have been torn down now.
And 3 were on the house tour this year.
Yes. And if you're interested in the house tour, we have some of the brochures in the Jamestown Vault and the bottom town and basement of Town Hall left over from this year's house tour. So if you'd like to have one, just stop by. Okay, thank you.